Breaking news. How Israel can win Gaza and deter Iran. Iran's onslaught on Israel with hundreds of drones and missiles this weekend has left Israel unsure of how to respond. The range of measures includes attacks on Iranian interests abroad and inside Iran. Israeli leaders faced a similar choice after the October 7 Hamas strikes. At the time, the question was whether to send troops to Gaza to end Hamas's control of the territory and its ability to threaten Israel militarily, or to pursue Israel's more powerful and dangerous northern enemy, the Iranian-backed Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, even though it was not directly involved in the October 7 attacks. Israel picked the first choice, shaping the confrontation. The Israeli leadership must decide how to show resilience and legitimacy without starting a fight with Iran. Despite pressure from the US and others to retreat into strategic capitulation, Israel must keep the course in Gaza. In practice, that means allowing the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, to enter Rafah, eliminate Hamas brigades and leaders there, and deepen planning for a day after in Gaza and a long-term Palestinian conflict resolution based on reality rather than American fantasies about a two-state solution that is no solution. After October 7, Israel took on Hezbollah because the Hamas attack showed it needed to defang its opponents, not deter them or secure a permanent modus vivendi. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and others supported that possibility. The war cabinet chose to target Hamas rather than Hezbollah after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister and IDF Head of Staff Benny Gantz overruled Gallant. An Israeli attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon would have devastated both countries and put greater pressure on the IDF to cut operations than in Gaza. After Hezbollah attacked Israel in 2006, the George W. Bush administration, in which I served, supported Israel for a few weeks before pressuring Israel to end the war with unfulfilled promises. In August 2006, UN Security Council Resolution 1701 banned any arms exports to Hezbollah and gave the Lebanese army control of Lebanon's south. Nobody has implemented either clause, demonstrating the hazards of relying on paper peace rather than reality. Israel learned that that's why it's resisting international pressure, especially from Washington, for a ceasefire that would leave Hamas in control of parts of Gaza, with its high command intact and able, with Iranian help, to rebuild a fighting force that could threaten Israel again. Netanyahu promises to keep attacking Hamas. Netanyahu wants to resume fighting Hamas after a temporary ceasefire frees Israeli hostages in Gaza and Hamas detainees in Israeli jails. Israel thinks that it must assault the Hamas military leadership and its remaining 4 battalions of organized forces in Rafah to defeat them, even if the fighting and civilian losses draw American and international criticism. Despite that risk, Israelis of all ideologies agree that Hamas must be defeated as an existential threat. All of Israel's opponents are watching to see if Israel can recover from the October 7 attack. Hamas can't destroy Israel. If they conclude it cannot, the Jewish state will die. Israelis perceived the devastating Hamas attack on Jewish men, women, and children, reminiscent of anti-Semitic pogroms and the Holocaust, as a test of who would be stronger, the Jews or their killers. Israel acquired Arab partners by showing power, not moderation. Israel has watched Iran build a ring of fire around Israel with proxies like the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and jihadists in Iraq and Syria. Israel has also seen a rise in weaponry trafficked into the West Bank. Every Israeli foe is looking to see if Israel can recover from the October 7 strike. Israelis are tired of administrations that fought ISIS telling them war can't eradicate a concept. That group had a plan, but without territory to govern, launch attacks, and grow its empire safely, it nearly collapsed. As its Moscow strike proved, ISIS is still a concern, but its threat level has decreased. As part of the Muslim Brotherhood and eager to murder Jewish Israelis for political gain, Hamas will survive and commit occasional terrorism. It needed space to amass its finances, train its men, and coordinate operations to damage Israel as it did on October 7. If Israel's Gaza campaign succeeds, Hamas will never have that again. It will be required to attack Rafah. Israel will lose the battle if its battalions and leaders survive. The U.S. should fear that. After the chaotic 2021 U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the slowing of American military aid to Ukraine, Washington cannot afford to further undermine its alliances or increase doubt among U.S. adversaries in China, Iran, and Russia, and allies in Asia and Europe, about American commitments and support. Due to its defensive nature, America's considerable and effective aid to Israel in defeating Iran's aerial onslaught does not change this. American demands that Israel allow Hamas to survive in Gaza and not respond to the Iranian onslaught will show Israelis that the U.S. policy goal is to avoid or swiftly end any conflict. That won't reassure countries facing Chinese, Iranian, or Russian aggression. A hostages for prisoners deal is also less likely due to public American pressure on Israel over Rafah. Every time high-ranking U.S. officials, including in Congress, and other Western nations demand a rapid ceasefire in Gaza and discourage an Israeli assault on Rafah, they raise Hamas-believed hostage price. Only the possibility of delaying or avoiding an Israeli onslaught on Rafah motivates the organization to release them. To Hamas, survival is success. Without an Israeli attack on Rafah, Hamas will survive. Everyone ISCRITICAL Israel must eliminate the Hamas military threat from Gaza and minimize civilian casualties. Whether it did the latter is fair, but critics are unfair. The extent possible should indicate analogies to contemporary wars, especially urban combat. As usual, detractors hold Israel to standards they apply to no other nation. Compared to the Iraq War, Gaza's civilian-to-military casualties ratio is better. The IDF is a citizens' army, disproving the claim that Israeli assaults target civilians, even relief workers. It is inconceivable that hundreds of thousands of civilian reservists in the army would follow and conceal orders to assault civilians and relief workers. Hamas wants civilian losses because it knows they will rapidly persuade Israel to halt fighting. Hamas created Gaza's massive and complex tunnel system to secure its leaders and fighters and enhance its offensive capabilities. American, European, and other leaders who ignore this are making, to the utmost possible, an insurmountable hurdle that would make defeating Hamas impossible. This does not mean Israel has done everything to protect and feed Gazan residents. The U.S. and other nations have condemned Israeli behavior in this aspect, and Israel has confessed some faults and begun supplying Gaza with additional food. However, many countries opposing Israel have done little for Palestinian citizens. The UAE built an 80,000-person Syrian refugee camp in Jordan. Why not Gaza? The EU may build tent cities for temporary shelter. Donors might cooperate with Israel to identify Gaza places where violence has halted or will end shortly to organize and pledge such operations. Though the difficulties are significant, neither the EU nor the UAE, not other purported Palestinian supporters like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, has even considered these options. Egypt has temporarily housed a few Gazans instead of tens of thousands. What about the US? Its aid airdrops seem like kindness. The Biden administration's plan to establish a temporary port off Gaza's coast for ships transporting food from Cyprus could be helpful, but who will distribute the food after it reaches on land is unclear. The next day, Americans have also criticized Israel for ignoring the day after in Gaza. Washington's lack of post-war preparedness before invading Iraq in 2003 may compromise its credibility on that problem. Whether Israel should design and implement post-war plans or let the U.S. and other donors to do so is disputed. It seems reasonable to expect a plan by now. The Jewish Institute for National Security of America and the Vandenberg Coalition, a network of foreign policy experts, organized a study group earlier this year that called for Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the U.S. to establish an international trust to rebuild Gaza and provide relief. The trust would marshal Gaza funds, coordinate with Gazans in the diaspora and in Gaza to restore essential services and begin reconstruction, work with Israel on security, border control, and other issues, and collaborate with international and non-governmental organizations with similar goals. Who should secure Gaza after Hamas is unclear. It would likely come from vetted non-Hamas police in Gaza, new forces that the U.S. would train at its existing Palestinian Security Forces Training Center in Jordan, Arabs who would be building refugee camps, tent cities, or other new residential areas in Gaza and might be willing to protect them, and private security companies that would protect food convoys, warehouses, and residences. You can even give local civic and economic groups or famous Gazan tribes security responsibility if they can keep the calm. A civilian structure provided electricity, water, and non-political police services including traffic control in Gaza before the war under Hamas. The Worldwide Trust wants to recreate it without Hamas. The top 2 or 3 levels of officials in every ministry must go, although they may be qualified experts without Hamas ties. However, the Palestinian Authority, PA, cannot rule Gaza due to its inadequacies, ineffectiveness.